My first guest this week is Charles Heller. He is the host of Liberty Watch Radio in Tucson, Arizona, a gun safety instructor, and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. There's been a lot of movement in Congress trying to pass new gun regulations, and this was even before the mass shootings of a couple weeks ago. So I wanted to have someone on who understands the law so we can have an honest conversation about guns. Here is the first segment of our interview. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charles. It's kind of fun to Charles each other.
Yes, the Charleses. So I originally talked about bringing you on to talk about guns, and now it seemed like the perfect time to reach out to you. Unfortunately, whenever there's a mass shooting, the gun debate is ramped up, and this is the situation we're in now. What would you say that those pushing for new gun regulations get wrong?
Let me tell you that you have to be a special kind of uninformed to believe that the type of gun has anything to do with the act of misusing it. Mm-hmm. All right? We get lost on the type of gun, and is it an assault weapon? Is it a weapon of war? Is it a this? Is it a that? I have friends that own machine guns. It's legal. It's not a problem. And have all kinds of, I have even more friends who own short-barreled rifles and shotguns. Some people call them sawed-off. They're really not sawed-off. They're made that way. They're not an issue. They behave with them morally and ethically. And if you're going to behave morally and ethically with a gun, it doesn't really matter what its form is. And if you're going to behave immorally with a gun, it really doesn't matter what its form is. And some people say, oh, well, you know, these high-capacity it's not high capacity. The gun was designed to work on the magazine it's using. These are sport utility rifles. The AR-15 is the most popular rifle in America right now. There's approximately 30 million copies, although no one knows the exact number, in American hands of the 400 million or so guns there are in the United States. And that number may be low. We really don't have a way of knowing. This gun has been on the market since 1959. And, you know, in 1960, we didn't suddenly have a surge of killings with AR-15s, which were plentifully available at the time. What's happened is we've had a decrease in morality. We've had a gradual lowering of the threshold of appropriate behavior and a lowering of the threshold of our standards. We've had horrible decimation of families in low-income economic communities, which are just tragic, not just about guns, but about what happens to people's lives when there's not a father in the household. And, you know, and people seek out gangs as a substitution for a parental figure. It's just horrible what happens. It's not about the guns. The other thing that people don't know is it doesn't matter what law you pass. It's not going to change the circumstance with violence using guns. Let me ask you this, Charles. Do you think if gang members in Chicago, you know, your show is on WIND, right?
It is.
WIND, Chicago. I've wanted to say that on the air for so long. I grew up listening to WIND. I'm a Chicago kid, Lane Tech, 75. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it does not matter what law you pass about firearms. It's not going to take away any of the criminal actions. In Chicago, do you think if you made the signs larger that say using a gun to commit a drive-by shooting is crime, that it would have any effect?
Well, I think that is the case, actually. I think the only reason there's so many shootings in Chicago as opposed to everywhere else in the country is because there's a vision problem and everybody doesn't have the glasses they need. So I think a bigger sign would solve all the problems.
Yeah, there you go. Charles, the thing is, Chicago is not the worst volume with guns by far in the United States. Chicago's about number 5.
Well, I would challenge you on that. I would challenge the 4 worst neighborhoods in Chicago versus the 4 worst neighborhoods in St. Louis and New Orleans. And I guarantee you, Chicago will be 1 or 2. That shouldn't matter, but I only make the point because I remember distinctly where the police chief a couple of years ago said, well, we have the problem contained. So he basically, this black man got on TV and specifically said, no, crime is really not that bad. They're only shooting each other in these 4 neighborhoods. What's the big deal?
And the unfortunate thing is what he's really saying in code is it's only the black people killing each other, which is horrible. I feel horrible about that. I really do. Some people think that the gun people are all just heartless and you let them bleed. Hell no. I don't just carry a gun, Charles. I carry a tourniquet. All right? Because I know what guns can do. And I'm not excited about using force. And I'm not excited to hear anybody else uses force. I don't even grin when I hear a burglar breaks into somebody's house and gets shot. It doesn't make me happy. What makes me happy is people learning how to safely and responsibly, as a family, learn responsibility through firearms ownership and use. That's what makes me excited is guys like Maj Touré, who's teaching the Black community how to be safe with a gun. I think that's wonderful. I'm happy for that. Not because I like or dislike any one set of people more than another. Just I like to see people, A, get along, and B, enjoy freedom responsibly.
Going back to the original question about what they get wrong, one other thing I find fascinating is background checks. I think there's a new bill that the House, I don't know what the Senate has done with it yet because I can't keep up. It's moving so fast.
They've taken it up, but they haven't passed anything yet.
Right, but in the House they did. So they're talking about extending and strengthening background checks. So we can get into, I'm open about all these issues I talk about. I want to find solutions. So I'll have a debate about anything. The issue is we don't start from a premise of logic and where we actually are. So I talk to a lot of my friends, and you're an authority on guns, and you know way more than I do, but I was in Chicago and I owned guns, so I know the process. And I asked them basic questions like, what do you think? Tell me what you think the process is to get a gun. It is fascinating what they say. I think as much as you know, you would probably be shocked by some of the things they say. This is the average layman, non-gun owner who wants more gun control. But you say, well, what do you think a person has to do to get a gun? So you know what they do have to do because you know this very well. You live it. Right. But what does the average Joe think you have to do to get a gun?
They've never heard of a FOID card.
Oh, yeah. Illinois is crazy. Right. They've never heard of that. They think you could just go. They think you could order a gun online and somebody will ship it to you and it will be on your doorstep.
Yeah. Doesn't Amazon have those? What do you mean I can't download a machine gun and print it,
Right.
They think all that crazy stuff.
Of course, people are going to believe we need stricter background checks because they don't know what the current ones are.
Right. Well, currently, in order to buy a firearm, if you buy it from a dealer, you have to go through a federal firearms licensee. You have to go do the background check. It's called the Brady check. And it's an instant check most of the time. Most of the ones that are either delayed or turned down are eventually resolved and transferred. Most of the positives, most of the hits that people get are either a false positive from a mistake in the name, or someone has used that social security number who's committed a crime, things like that. And what happens is eventually those get resolved, and the FBI gives them what's called a UPIN, a Universal Personal Identification Number, which contains the notes of why the person is okay to buy, and then it gets approved. A slight delay and it gets approved. The vast majority are approved. And criminals know that they're not going to go and get a background check because they know they're not going to pass it. So they're not going to go get a background check. One thing that's important for your listeners to know, especially in Chicago, is that the current murderer in Boulder, Colorado, passed the background check. So did the one in Lakeland, Florida, and the one in Sugar Land, Texas, and the guy in Las Vegas, and that nutcase at Virginia Tech. They all passed the background check. And understand that if you are if you're in favor of background checks, you are rooting for a team that does not exist. There is no gun law you can pass that'll prevent this. Those laws that could mitigate this generally already exist if they're used by an informed public. For instance, current guy in Boulder, Colorado. The family was very concerned about him, that he was mentally ill, number one. Number two, he was waving a gun around that his sister described as a machine gun. It wasn't. It was an AR pistol. Number three, he was saying that there was a bullet jammed in it and pointing it all around unsafely. And number four is that he had social media posts that were very antisocial. There are laws, especially Colorado has a very strong law on mental health and firearms. Yeah. And if they would have called the authorities to report this, there's a process already in law to take the guy's gun away and incarcerate him for a period of time for observation. That's already in law and has been for years. There's no reason why that had to happen if people followed existing law. They don't follow the law.
Coming up, more with Charles Heller, co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Kind of overdid it in Denver, and I just can't remember her name.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. We are talking about guns, gun rights and gun laws with Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. In this segment, I talked to him about the lack of enforcement of the current laws and the uphill battle gun advocates have because they're losing in the court of public opinion. We focus on background checks. They don't know what the current background checks are. They want new laws, but we don't enforce the laws that are currently on the books. A guy gets pulled over in Chicago, police comes in, they do a search, they find a weapon. It's not registered to them. The serial numbers filed off, the whole nine. What do you think they do in that situation?
They probably take the gun and tell the guy.
They definitely take the gun, but is he doing 10 years for a gun charge?
Well, first of all, possession of a defaced gun is a federal felony. Right? In addition to it being in Illinois, I think it's IL 720, but I could be wrong. But the point is, it's a violation of Illinois law. It's a violation of federal law, but they don't have the time to go after that stuff. I'll give you an example. In Tucson, we're down to 331 police officers and 42 sergeants on the Tucson Police Department for a metro community of about 650,000. Talk about defunding the police. They've been doing that here for a dozen years. They no longer show up at traffic accidents unless there's injury to city property or human injury. They just put out a list of 20 calls they'll no longer take, and one of them is burglary unless the burglar is actually there. People don't understand that there is no duty for the police to protect you. There is no requirement whatsoever in law. Unless you're in custody, there is no duty at all for police to protect you. Even if they decide they see you being attacked and they decide for their own safety not to save you, you can't litigate against them. You cannot sue them for failure to do their job because that's not their job. And listen, don't take what I say at face value. Don't believe me just because it's a so-called expert saying it. Look it up for yourself. It's a 1981 case called Warren versus District of Columbia from 1981. Right. And what it says is, in essence, the police cannot be sued for failure to protect the individual citizen. What people need to understand is that they're on their own. I call it in my classes and on the radio on my program, I call it yo-yo and yo-yor. Yo-yo is you're on your own. And yo-yor is you own your own results. And the two of them go together. You're responsible for the result of every shot that emanates from the barrel of your gun. You cannot injure an innocent person in an act of defending yourself. There's many things you can and can't do in terms of self-defense. You can only use deadly force against a deadly threat or one of grave bodily injury. There's a lot of rules. But once you know what the rules are, even in Chicago, when people have a carry permit, the Illinois carry license, and a FOID card, and their gun is registered, if they shoot somebody in self-defense and it's a legitimate shoot, the police leave them alone. It's amazing. The Chicago cops can be easier on people with a permit and a FOID card than they can be in many other jurisdictions where it's more open.
Right. So we have this push. We know they want to come to these dangerous weapons. And you made a point earlier that these weapons of war that they like to say, and whatever, like machine guns, that you hear that a lot when all this stuff is not true. But they use that rhetoric to kind of scare people into submission, so to speak. But I think that the biggest problem that gun advocates have is the fact that they're fighting on two fronts. You're fighting for your legal protections, and you're fighting the same fight in the court of public opinion. And there's a lot of people like you all over the country. I know some in several states that are doing great work. but you're doing better with the legal than the opinion. But the problem is, in some ways, if we don't make some headways in the public opinion argument, eventually we lose even more, because the anti-gun movement, you make a valid point about them going after those scary looking rifles, but we're going to use the facts in our argument. And if they shift public opinion, then the fact is they will make it worse for us, because then the people will just say, you're right. More people do get killed with handguns than rifles. We should probably take your handguns too.
Right. Well, look, there's an old saying that politics is downstream from culture.
Mm-hmm.
And when you win the cultural war, you eventually win the political war. And you're right. So here's how I deal with it myself. First of all, the origins of gun control start in racism. The original gun control laws in the United States, for the most part, were made to keep freedmen from getting guns. They were originated, and even though we had concealed weapons laws, especially in the South, it was rarely ever enforced against white folks, but it was against blacks. And it's just an unfortunate part of our history. Eventually, it got to be where gun control got to be ethnically equivalent. It eventually metastasized to be used against everybody. And it was evil. It shouldn't have been done that way, okay? But what I like to tell people is there was a time when we voted on people's rights. There was a time in this country when we did that. That time was called Jim Crow. And if you like Jim Crow, you'll love gun control, because it affects the same people that Jim Crow did.
The shifts has been slight in the sense that it's gone from specifically to blacks and other targeted minorities, to it being the left likes to talk about income inequality and the income gap. It is becoming a, economic form of oppression of rights, in a sense, right? You talk about, we keep going back to Chicago because it's one of the main places where this happens, where New York is another example, where they make it legal because they were forced to, after the DC and the Chicago case, they were forced to, but they make it so onerous and expensive that for a lot of people, it's virtually illegal to carry a gun in Chicago. If you poor, but you want to have the same rights as everybody else, and you and I and most people on the left will say, yeah, they should have the same rights. But then they're going to tell you, well, in Chicago, you got to get a FOID card. It's $10, but still, you got to pay for a card just to look at a gun in a gun shop, right? Then you got to pay for the gun, which you're already scratching up money for the gun, but they're making you take classes. You got to pay for those. They make you take this fee. The application costs money. They keep piling on costs. And then they put a 5 cents a bullet tax on top of the bullets to buy the bullets for the gun. But what you get is it's cheaper for people to just buy guns illegally. Unfortunately, some people will do it, or find other avenues to protect themselves because they can't buy the gun legally because they can't afford it. So how is that giving people the rights to all citizens when you make it where some of them simply can't afford it?
It's not, and it's in effect a black code against gun ownership in the ethnic communities. It's really unfortunate. That said, it's, you got to attack it two ways. You either go at it legislatively or you go at it through the legal system. The legal system is not terribly friendly to lawsuits. You've got to find the perfect plaintiff. You got to find an Otis McDonald, who's passed on now, but he was a very honorable guy. I met him in Chicago, and not too long after the case. And you got to find a plaintiff, and you got to go after it in just the right way. Frame the case in such a way that you win. The Second Amendment Foundation is very good at that. And they've got a bulldog of an attorney by the name of Alan Glura, who's won a lot of these cases. But it's difficult to do that, and unless you have an angel charity like the Second Amendment Foundation or your state level ISRPA, the Illinois State Rifle and Pistol Association, on your side, you're probably not going to fund that lawsuit out of your own pocket. Mm-hmm. And, you got to frame the case, find the perfect plaintiff, the perfect circumstance where you can get the result you want. And if you don't do that, you're not going to win. And don't go standing up to these idiots by yourself. Don't ever, ever do that. You want to go in numbers with an organization that knows what they're doing, like the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, like the Second Amendment Foundation, like Gun Owners of America, like the Illinois State Rifle and Pistol Association. If you have a state where there's a Citizens Defense League, like in Arizona, where we have the Arizona Citizens Defense, or the Virginia Citizens Defense League, or Connecticut, There's a number of states that have citizens defense leagues that may help you go after this, but you want to be in a united front. You do not want to go up against the power and authority of government by yourself. You will lose. And it's not just that you lose. You know, there are cases like Cruikshank versus Illinois that are terrible law that get named after you. You know, need I say Dred Scott versus Sanford? You don't want to be Dred Scott. That for all of history, a terrible, terrible decision is named after you. You don't want to be that guy.
Coming up, more with Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. We are playing my interview with Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio in Tucson, Arizona, gun safety instructor, and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. In this segment, we discuss the de facto ways the government impedes the rights of gun owners. I talk about those pesky no gun signs, and I ask him how criminals get their weapons. But another thing I want to say is you talk about it being unfair. I say to lower income people, you say de facto black. But let's talk about everybody else. They're kind of getting the shaft too in many ways, especially if they live in more liberal run cities and states. So here's a good example. Talk about what happens if you carry a gun into a place that has a no gun sign.
Well, it depends on the state you're in. In Arizona, that sign has no force in law unless you're in a place that serves where you can consume it or a government building. And if it's a government building, they have to put in lockers where you can store it in Arizona. That's a law that the organization, the Arizona Citizens Defense League, that I'm co-founder of, helped get passed.
Because otherwise you can't even carry your gun when you go in there.
Right, exactly, because you don't want to leave it in your car. Right. So in some states, it's like that, where they put up a sign and the sign has no effect in law unless certain places. Yeah. Or a place where firearms are illegal, like the parking lot of a jail.
Right. But I mean, if you live in a place like Chicago, or places like places that if they give it that force, aren't they basically telling you can't carry a gun because the signs are everywhere?
Well, then what they're telling you is they don't want your business. So what you need to do is seek out businesses that sell what you want to buy that don't have the sign up. Or the other thing you can do is if you find a place that doesn't allow you to have your gun, you go in there politely and you say to the people, can I speak to the manager? They come out and they say, yeah. I said, look, I love your place, but you make it illegal for me to be here, so I have to leave. I'm going to take my gun and my money, and I'm going to bring it to your competitor, and I'm going to eat there, and I'm going to warn all my friends this isn't a safe place because your sign attracts bad guys that are looking for victims. You've made it what's called an attractive nuisance. So I'm going to take my gun and my money elsewhere. But look, when you take the sign down, I'm going to bring 5 times more friends with me who are here to celebrate and buy your product or eat in your restaurant or fill in the blank than I ever told not to come here because it's a dangerous place. So it's up to you. Right. If that sign is more important than our business, then it's your business and we'll respect it and I'm leaving. But if you'd like to make a quality decision, I'll flood your place with good business.
Well, you gave me a good segue. You mentioned that business becomes a magnet for bad guys. So
it does.
I want to shift to criminals. They tend not to follow laws, which is so weird. But where do most of the criminals get their guns? I'm going to guess. I'm going to take a guess. You ready? Wait. I want to take a guess. You ready? I know where they get them from. Gun show loopholes.
ATF actually has studied this pretty thoroughly, and very few people get their guns illegitimately at gun show. It's less than 3%, and I suspect it's closer to 1%. The majority of people who get firearms who shouldn't have one get them from straw purchase. In other words, they send someone who's not prohibited to get a gun from them. prohibitive.
Well, why would that person
And
do that? Why would a law-abiding citizen with no priors go buy a gun and pass it off to some unsavory character?
Familial pressure, pressure of a girlfriend or a spouse on a spouse. There's all kinds of reasons why a person could be coerced into doing it, or they just get paid, $100 to go do it, and they need the $100.
Right.
And they don't have morals, they can't afford them, So there's a lot of reasons why that happens. Another thing is there's a pretty good iron river of stolen guns floating around in the market. And a lot of them get their guns on the black market from guns that are stolen. And there are even some places, I'm told, where a bad guy can actually rent a gun. And the advantage of doing that is it's disposed of when they're done with it. They don't have to worry about what to do with it when they're done, when they no longer need it for whatever particular crime they're going to do. There's been a lot of guns that have been traced when they do ballistic identification on them. It turns out guns have been involved in 6, 7, 8, 9 crimes. And finally, the person who uses it gets shot and injured or killed. The gun gets left at the crime scene, and they're able to connect it to a bunch of different crimes. So that happens. And so instead of concentrating on the gun, why not concentrate on the people who commit the offenses? Now, I have a theory that if you took the entire constabulary establishment of all the regulatory agencies in places like New York and Illinois that regulate guns, and you just did away with the regulation, and you took all those people and put them on the street and go after the known bad actors and follow them, watch them. And then if you believe there's probable cause to think that they have a weapon on them, you get a warrant to search their place. You find them in possession of a gun, and now you've got felon in possession. It's a 10-year federal felony. You go after those people. You put them in jail. And if you find anything else illegal, like enough drugs to qualify for a charge of intent to distribute, now you enhance the sentence by intent to distribute plus the possession of a firearm. You keep those people out of circulation for a long time.
Coming up, more with Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. In the last segment, he was telling me where criminals get their guns, and we continue that conversation here with me asking him why a law-abiding citizen would buy a gun for a criminal. What are some of the things we can actually do to change the gun problem without suppressing rights, and why it's important for law-abiding citizens to have access to guns. Well, why would that person do that? Why would a law-abiding citizen with no priors go buy a gun and pass it off to some unsavory character?
Familial pressure, pressure of a girlfriend or a spouse on a spouse. There's all kinds of reasons why a person could be coerced into doing it, or they just get paid, $100 to go do it, and they need the $100. Right. And they don't have morals, they can't afford them, So there's a lot of reasons why that happens. Another thing is there's a pretty good iron river of stolen guns floating around in the market. And a lot of them get their guns on the black market from guns that are stolen. And there are even some places, I'm told, where a bad guy can actually rent a gun. And the advantage of doing that is it's disposed of when they're done with it. They don't have to worry about what to do with it when they're done, when they no longer need it for whatever particular crime they're going to do. There's been a lot of guns when they do ballistic identification on them. It turns out guns have been involved in 6, 7, 8, 9 crimes. And finally, the person who uses it gets shot and injured or killed. The gun gets left at the crime scene, and they're able to connect it to a bunch of different crimes. And so instead of concentrating on the gun, why not concentrate on the people who commit the offenses? Now, I have a theory that if you took the entire establishment of all the regulatory agencies in places like New York and Illinois that regulate guns, and you just did away with the regulation, and you took all those people and put them on the street and go after the known bad actors and follow them. And then if you believe there's probable cause that they have a weapon on them, you get a warrant to search their place. You find them in possession of a gun, and now you've got felon in possession. It's a 10-year federal felony. You go after those people. You put them in jail.
I love that plan, and I've been saying things like it for years. But the problem where we fail and our big flaw is when reality smacks us in the face, because we know Kim Fox and Gascon in LA and all the others won't prosecute. And then so smart people like you who know the law will say, yeah, but those are also federal laws. But yeah, we got Joe Biden now. They're still not going to prosecute.
Well, the thing about it is, if you were to take, like there's been places like Project Exile where they've used that in Virginia very heavily, where the federal and the state and the local governments combine to go after known bad actors, find them with firearms and prosecute them and run it through the federal system. You end up having a great reduction in crime because A, people know that Project Exile is enforced, and B, you end up taking a lot of bad guys off the streets. And it's worked very, very effectively. Of course, the current administration has stopped doing that because invariably it ends up getting a lot of minorities prosecuted, and they claim that that's racist. Well, I invoke what Beretta said, who turned out to be a fairly bad actor himself too, in more ways than one. If you don't want to do the time, then don't do the crime. It's that simple. There's another thing we can do, if I may continue here for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And this is, the police, like I said earlier, are immune from the duty to protect you. And the police are not required to protect you. And the cops are the good guys most of the time. Sometimes they aren't, but most of the times they are. We know there's examples recently when they're not. But most of the time, the cops are the good guys. They're the Boy Scout. Even the girls are Boy Scouts. Now that's literally true sometimes. But they're the people who want to be part of the solution, not of the problem, but not the problem. But the thing is, cops are first responders. You are the zero responder until they arrive. Anybody that's ever had a criminal act committed against them knows that there isn't time to say, hold on a minute with that attack. I want to call 911. There isn't time to do that. And even if you did, you'd be spending time on hold with the dispatcher and then talking to the dispatcher and then waiting for the cops to show up, no matter how fast they arrive. There isn't time to do that. You are the zero responder. You are the one that's got to act in the moment until the cops arrive. And what we need to do is we need to reach herd immunity of armed, trained, responsible citizen zero responders. Take the concealed weapons class. Take additional training. There's great places around the country to do that. There's great shops that have advanced courses. You can take courses now that are electronic, where you shoot against the machine. They put real life scenarios of self-defense on them. Another thing you can do is buy a BB gun, an air gun, a CO2 pistol that's a replica of the firearm you own. It'll fit in the same holster and train inside your house carefully with an appropriate backstop, but practice the draw, practice the trigger stroke so you don't jerk the trigger when you shoot. Practice accurately shooting. Get a BB trap and shoot inside your own home or apartment if the noise doesn't travel. It's not very loud. It's not very loud at all. But practice and learn the skill set. And now, if God forbid it goes wrong, instead of 10 people getting murdered in a supermarket, the gun goes off a couple of times and the bad guy gets taken out by one or two other shoppers who see what's happening. They're situationally aware and they take the bad guy out.
Coming up, my final segment with Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You like me and I like you.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. This is our final segment with Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio in Tucson, Arizona, gun safety instructor and co-founder of the Arizona Citizens Defense League. We've been talking about guns, gun rights, gun laws, what you can do to protect your rights, what they're trying to do to take them away, and how they're disingenuous about doing it, and solutions, what steps and actions need to be taken. We talked about proper training for the gun owners, and we talked about enforcing the laws. And at the end of the last segment, Charles was talking about how the citizens should be the first line of defense for themselves and should, being properly trained, be able to assist the police. He continues here.
And I'll tell you another thing. We gotta do that. Let's say the police officer shows up in the circumstance, right? The poor guy who got killed in Boulder, the cop, the 51-year-old cop with 7 kids. Okay, the cop is busy engaging the bad guy. What a perfect time for one of these armed citizens to take that guy out and protect the cop. The cop's not Superman. The cop needs to be protected too. The cop needs to have the protection of the cooperation of the citizenry. And we have people, it's happened numerous times around the country that armed civilians have saved cops. We had it happen in Arizona last year where a DPS cop, Department of Public Safety, our state police, was about to get murdered. And a civilian stopped, saw what was happening. It was right on I-17 outside of Flagstaff. Said, "You need help?" And the cop said, "Yeah, help. And the bad guy by that point had gotten the cop's gun away from him and had the trigger halfway back, is going to shoot him in the head. And the armed civilian just quietly took aim with his .45 and put 8 rounds in the back of the bad guy. Problem solved. The cop caught his gun on the way down, handcuffed the suspect, who wasn't going to need handcuffing anyway, but handcuffed the suspect. And the Department of Public Safety awarded the citizen, gave him an award for saving the cop's life. The cops aren't averse to this. We need to protect cops. There's a whole lot more armed civilians in the whole United States. There's less than 1.5 million police officers. Yep. There's 18 million people in the United States who have concealed weapons permits, plus the people who carry without a permit where it's not necessary, like Arizona, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, all the places. Kansas now that have Louisiana that have constitutional carry. You don't even need a permit to carry. There's way, way, way more civilian honest gun carriers than there are cops. We need to protect the cops.
Well, we are running out of time for this hour. We have to have you back to go into that, because I would love to talk about, let's look at the numbers in those states you mentioned where they have constitutional carry. And I bet that 90% of the people in those states have been shot. Obviously, that's why we need gun control, because you can't just have people walking around with a gun and not need it. It's silliness. But, I appreciate you coming on and bringing a little context to this. And again, would love to have you back to talk about other topics too, or to go more in depth here. He is Charles Heller, host of Liberty Watch Radio, AM 1030 in Tucson, KVOI, and co-founder of Arizona Citizens Defense League. Mr. Heller, or Charles too, thanks for coming on.
Charles, thank you for having me on.